Data released by Statistics South Africa shows that unemployment increased by 0.8 percentage points in the first quarter of 2024. The latest quarterly labour force survey indicates that unemployment increased from 32.1% to 32.9% in the first quarter of this year. The number of unemployed persons increased by 330,000 to reach 8.2 million in the first quarter, while the number of employed persons increased by 22,000 to reach 16.7 million in the first quarter of 2024. Well, to discuss this latest data further, I'm joined by Zwelinzima Vavi. He's the SAFTU General Secretary. Thank you very much for joining us. So 330,000 more people have become unemployed in the first quarter, and even the informal sector saw a decline of some 100,000 jobs. Are you surprised?
Not at all. We're not surprised. The picture is as awful as it has always been for the past 30 years, or even during the apartheid colonial era. We were facing a crisis we are facing today. What is disappointing, talking now on the eve of the elections, is that the governing party is not realizing up to this moment that no matter who they change as a president, whether it is Ramaphosa, Zuma, Mbeki, or Mutlante, or anyone, as long as they're still following the current path of economic programs that are underpinned by neoliberalism and austerity programs, we are not going to beat, we are not going to break the backbone of unemployment in our country. So, it's not a matter about who can speak English better. It's a matter of the fact that we must recognize that our unemployment is structural and that it is long-term. If you look at, for example, on the long-term unemployment, it will tell you that 6.1 million South Africans have been trapped in unemployment for 5 years. And that has now increased to 6.2 million people who they are in structural unemployment.
Yes, so Mr. Vavi, let me come in there and ask you, so how do we break the backbone of this crisis?
Change the economic policy. That's what SAFTU have been saying. That's what most of the progressive civil society formations have been calling for. You can't have austerity and at the same time hope that you're going to grow the economy. And you can't have an investment strike led by the public sector and the private sector and hope that you will beat the structural unemployment crisis.
Yeah.
You can't deindustrialization to continue unabated and you hope that you're going to beat the crisis of unemployment. You can't allow the current fiscal and monetary policies of the government and maintained fiscal discipline, so-called, where you cutting taxes from the rich, where you always contemplate of increasing the taxes on the poor, meaning that your strategy is to redistribute wealth from the poor to the rich, and hope that when you have the overwhelming majority of your people, black people, unemployed and poor without land and property, you're going to address the crisis of unemployment. What is disappointing us on the eve of the elections is that not even the opposition parties have their fingers on the right spot of understanding the crisis that we are facing. So there is always a debate about the unemployment, but there is short of suggestions about how the crisis of unemployment can be resolved. And that's what is frustrating us.
Yeah, so when you look at the political parties' various manifestos and what they say around job creation over the next number of years, these numbers range between 2 and 4 million jobs. What's your feeling when you hear those sorts of promises that people obviously would really be listening to because people are sitting at home unemployed?
Exactly, which is the most dangerous part, is to discuss a long-term crisis on the eve of an election so contested. Because the temptation by the political parties is to basically go to their terms and get figures. 2 million, 3 million, 4 million, whatever the figures they think that will give them a mileage in the elections. And without addressing the structural nature and without addressing the fact that this is a historical crisis that we are debating, and that for 30 years we have been skating around the crisis instead of confronting the crisis as it is. And now, going into the elections and possibly beyond, with the ruling party in denial about what is causing this crisis, with the opposition parties not offering any real solution to address the long-term nature of the structural unemployment, the unemployed people now equaling to 12.1 million. Just imagine, 12.1 million people who are unemployed. And when you look at the young people, you get scared when you look at the fact that they are now, I just can't get the, it's 8.2 million young people who are unemployed in this economy.
Yeah.
And wow, we are in a deep, deep, deep crisis. Our call to the government remains: change the policies, change the tech. And this thing have not worked for 30 years. It is not going to work again for another 30 years. You can't continue to repeat the same thing for 30 years and hope that for some reason, if you put in a taller, light skin or whatever, the situation is going to change without addressing the structural nature of the crisis that we are facing.
Yeah, you have talked about the ticking time bomb for a number of years. Lastly, before I let you go, Mr. Vavi, what's your reaction to the DA indicating that it would get rid of the minimum wage should it come into power?
One of the biggest news coming from this statistic, South Africa, is just using the narrow definition, shows that the unemployment rate in the Western Cape worsened by 11.7%. So there are more people who are getting unemployed in the Western Cape. We reject their suggestion that in order to address the structural unemployment crisis, we must attack the rights workers have won over many decades of hard struggle. The national minimum wage protects the most vulnerable sections of the working class who are not strong enough to belong to powerful trade unions who can bargain on their behalf. They are meant to protect the farm workers, the domestic workers, security cleaning, informal sector workers, who, without the interventions of the government, will be on their own. Already, SAFTU is very critical of the 4,200 rands national minimum wage in the light of the fact that the statistics, in particular produced by the Pietermaritzburg Economic Group, show that you need 5,200 rands just for food, not including transport for your kids to go to school, not for you to go to any movie on Friday or soccer match. Just for food, you need 5,200 rands. Now, if the DA is attacking that 4,200 rands by saying it is too much, quite clearly, the DA is predictable because it is indeed a renowned spokesperson of the elites in our society, mostly white elites who are more likely to be the employers, to be the ones who are commanding the economy, bearing in mind that our economy is having a situation where 10% only of the population owns 90% of the wealth. So it is speaking on behalf of the 10%, that is the employers, and it is showing the middle finger to the 90% of the people of this country who have no wealth in their country, who are landless, who rely on employment, and who needs government protection when it comes to the protection of the most basic wages that they should earn as they work.
Mr. Vavi, thank you very much indeed for your comments there and for this interview. That was Zwelinzima Vavi. He's the SAFTU General Secretary.